All right, John, let's talk about this because what just happened is not a refutation. It's a vocabulary exercise. You made an entire response listing terms like false dichotomy, non sequitur, poisoning the well, and appeal to authority. But here's the issue: naming a logical fallacy is not the same thing as disproving an argument. And this is where your response completely falls apart.
These are all the logical fallacies the Catholic veteran did in one video, and I want you to read them and understand why they are logically fallacious. But the one I really want you to focus on is ad hominem and poisoning the well. This is one of the main reasons why I did this video, because it's an attack on my character and claim that I bared false witness, yet you provided no evidence that I did so. They tried to force me two options, which is called a false dichotomy. Either A, Rome has infallible binding authority, or B, the canon is mere opinion, which is not true. There is a third option. God inspired scripture, the apostolic church received it, the spirit preserved it, and the church recognized and already carried apostolic authority.
You kept claiming that I made a false dichotomy because I argued that if the canon was an infallible scripture, then there must be an authoritative mechanism for definitively identifying it. But that is not a false dichotomy. That is an epistemological problem. And those are not the same thing. I never argued that either Rome or total chaos. I argued this: if Christians possess infallible certainty that these exact books belong in scripture, then a merely fallible process cannot ultimately be the foundation of that certainty. And that's the issue. And notice something important. You never actually answered that. You just repeated, that doesn't prove Rome. Okay. But disproving Rome is not the same thing as solving the canon problem. And that's the part you keep skipping, John.
There's still a major logical gap that he left out for you, which is that doesn't necessarily mean that it requires an infallible Roman magisterium. The Protestant position is at odds with a lot of these things being mentioned, being the liturgical involvement and so on. What we say is that the church's recognition was ministerial, not magisterial, and that's the difference. Fallible, but providentially guided, and that works within our worldview and common sense. The church can have a real role and not be the canon-making authority. A court may recognize a birth certificate as authentic, but that doesn't mean that the person exists because they recognized it. They were already existing to begin with.
Catholics agree that scripture was inspired before recognition, and we have agreed for this for 2,000 years. The church did not create scripture, God inspired scripture. But here's the question you still haven't answered, John. Who had the authority to settle disputes when Christians disagreed? Because they did disagree. And this is where your argument starts collapsing under its own weight. You said the criteria were apostolic origin, doctrinal consistency, and widespread use. And fine, but who determines those? Who determines what counts as apostolic? Who determines what counts as orthodox doctrine? And who determines what counts as legitimate widespread use? Because those criteria do not interpret themselves. And historically, Christians disagreed about those exact questions. The Shepherd of Hermas was accepted by some Christians. The Didache was highly respected, and the Epistle of Barnabas circulated widely. Meanwhile, books like Hebrews, James, Revelation, and Second Peter were disputed in various regions. Eusebius himself categorizes books as recognized, disputed, and rejected. So no, this was not everybody instantly knew the canon and the church just nodded yes. That's historical oversimplification.
Catholics love to bring up Luther because it gets them emotional, but it's a weak argument, so let's talk about it. Not Martin Luther for removing books is the same thing that's done historically, so this actually works against your point. Though Luther wanted to remove James, the Protestant position didn't allow it because of this fact. So yes, private individuals can make bad canon judgments, but that is not the same thing, as therefore Protestantism is wrong or worse. The Roman Catholic Church has infallible authority over scripture, which is a non sequitur.
This section right here may have accidentally hurt your position more than helped it, because I asked what stopped Luther from successfully removing books, and your answer was the Protestant position didn't allow it. Okay, which Protestant position? Lutherans, Reformed, Anglicans, Baptists, Evangelicals? Who had the authority to tell Luther no? What council? What binding authority? What infallible mechanism? Because once you start answering those questions, you begin walking directly towards the Catholic argument. Somebody had to settle disputes. And if your answer is, well, the broader church recognized it, congratulations. You're now appealing to an ecclesial authority and historical consensus, which means your argument is not no authority exists. Your argument is there is authority, but I don't want to call it authoritative. And that's the contradiction, John.
These are all the logical fallacies the Catholic veteran did in one video, and I want you to read them and understand why they are logically fallacious. But the one I really want you to focus on is ad hominem and poisoning the well. This is one of the main reasons why I did this video, because it's an attack on my character.
And this one honestly shocked me a little. You accused me of appeal to authority because I referenced Ignatius, Irenaeus, Augustine, councils, apostolic succession. John, Christianity itself is historical. You cannot discuss the formation of the canon without historical authority. Your entire argument depends on appeals to authority. You appeal to early church recognition, apostolic consensus, widespread acceptance, and the Protestant acceptance of Luther's rejection. Those are all appeals to authority structures. The difference is Catholics are honest about it. And by the way, appealing to a qualified historical witness is not automatically a fallacy. If I cite a church father discussing the canon, that is evidence, especially when we are discussing church history. That's not fallacious. That's called historical argumentation.
But the one I really want you to focus on is ad hominem and poisoning the well.
Now, let's deal with the accusation, because this one is incredible. You accused me of poisoning the well. Meanwhile, your original video literally says the more you learn, the less Catholic you will be, and refers to Catholicism and Orthodoxy as cult structures. John, that is textbook poisoning the well. That is prejudicing the audience emotionally before the argument even begins. I never called you stupid. I never insulted your intelligence. I never attacked your worth as a person. I criticized your argument and your omissions. Those are not the same thing. Saying the presentation leaves out important context is not ad hominem. And honestly, this entire response feels like a giant attempt to avoid the actual theological issue by turning the conversation into debate terminology.
You guys love to use 1 Thessalonians, but you either lie about what it actually says or you willfully misrepresent it. No, that passage does not say that you should listen to traditions and the letter. It says traditions or the letter. It's really different.
And then there's the Second Thessalonians argument. This was probably the weakest section. Paul says, stand firm and hold to the traditions which you were taught by us, either by word of mouth or by letter. The word or here is not excluding one form of authority from the other. Paul's point is that apostolic teaching came through both oral and written transmission. Otherwise, Paul would effectively be saying you can follow oral apostolic teaching or written apostolic teaching, but not both. The interpretation makes no sense in context. And the early church clearly did not operate according to sola scriptura. For decades, there was no finalized New Testament canon. Christians relied on apostolic preachings, bishops, liturgy, and sacred tradition. Even Irenaeus in the 2nd century argues against heresies through apostolic succession and the authority of the church. Not everybody privately reads the New Testament on their own, because the New Testament canon wasn't even fully settled yet.
And then by the time that the Catholic Church came along and recognized the Bible, those things were already established. And it was basically a matter of saying, like, yeah, we agree.
And this historical point matters too. You said by the time the Catholic Church came along, no, the Catholic Church predates the finalized canon. Ignatius of Antioch uses the term Catholic Church around 107, and that's before the canon is formally settled. 1 Timothy 3:15 calls the church the pillar and foundation of the truth, not the future table of contents, the church, which makes sense because Christianity was never founded on a floating book disconnected from a teaching authority. Christ founded a church, and through that church, the canon was discerned, defended, preserved, and declared, not invented, declared. And here's where I want everybody watching this to really think carefully. If Christianity operated perfectly fine for decades before the New Testament canon was finalized, then how can sola scriptura possibly be the original model of Christianity? Because you cannot have scripture as your sole infallible authority when you don't even know what infallible scripture really is. And that is the problem your response never answered. And throwing debate terminology at the screen doesn't solve anything. At the end of the day, the issue is not, did the church create scripture? No serious Catholic claims that. The issue is, did Christ leave behind a living teaching authority capable of preserving and definitively identifying divine revelation? And Catholics say yes. And history looks an awful lot more coherent when you do. Thank you for watching, and God bless.
This is one of the main reasons why I did this video, because it's an attack on my character.